Back from recess. On Monday, we were there discussing House Bill 22-102. However, we had recessed because there was a scheduled meeting with FAA, OPA, CPA, and Department of Finance, along with the presiding officers of both the House and the Senate yesterday. And so I asked that Rep. Sablan and Rep. Camacho attend that meeting with the FAA to find out more about how the 1% OPA fee may affect any federal grants awarded to CPA. And so before we discuss any proposed amendments or substitute, I would like to hand the floor over to Rep. Sablan or Rep. Camacho to give us a summary of what had transpired and some of the questions that were answered um, by these officials. And so with that, I hand the floor over to Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, colleagues. So I would say that it was a informative meeting that we had. There were two officials from the FAA, including Mr. Victor Globa, who is the program manager for compliance for the region with FAA, and then Mr. Carlos Salas, who is the ADO based in Honolulu. And also present was Ms. Kina Peter from OPA, Secretary David Attelig from Department of Finance, and Ms. Kim Hines and Mr. Chris Tenorio from CPA. And the main question, of course, was whether the 1% public auditor fee that all autonomous agencies are required to pay from their operations budgets, whether that for CPA constitutes unlawful revenue diversion. And the FAA official said that it may be considered revenue diversion if but it depends. So they couldn't give us kind of a final determination right then and there that it is in fact revenue diversion. They did express concern that CPA may be in jeopardy of being placed in non-compliance and may be at risk of losing federal funds. But they also said that that it all depends on whether there is an approved cost allocation plan. It depends on how these OPA fees are actually used, and if and their main concern was to ensure that airport revenues are used for airport operations, maintenance, and infrastructure projects as required by the federal grant assurances and by federal law. And so OPA did indicate, their position. They maintain their position that this should be an allowable cost, even under their own reading of the federal regulations, which provide for indirect costs. And they also indicated that they do want to elevate this inquiry. And finance actually also shared the same view that this is an allowable cost. It's the cost of doing business as being part of the government. And OPA does so much more than just audit the government agencies. They also, as we know, conduct investigations, perform inspections, reviews, and performance audits, and so forth. And so what I wanted to propose today as a result of these discussions and a review of all the correspondence that has been provided by OPA and CPA is a number of amendments to the bill, House Bill 22-102. And Chairman Donald has placed it on the screens for everybody to review, and we could provide a copy. But basically, what I wanted to propose was a temporary exemption for the Commonwealth Ports Authority for airport revenue only for the 1% OPA fee. Because CPA isn't disputing non-airport revenue. So the seaport revenue, they will still have to pay the 1%. And then to rewrite the findings to reflect some of the discussions that we've had with OPA, FAA, and CPA. So one, to recognize OPA's functions as the government's watchdog for deterring, detecting, and investigating waste, fraud, and abuse of resources, and also OPA's need for sufficient funding and independence from political interference. And the findings go on to also recognize CPA's role as an autonomous agency in managing the Commonwealth's ports. And we recognize that CPA is not funded primarily by legislative appropriations, but does rely heavily on federal grants, as well as revenues generated from fees and rents. We also recognize in the findings, the proposed findings, that CPA and federal grantors have expressed concern that the 1% public auditor fee from airport revenues may constitute unlawful revenue diversion and could lead to CPA's placement in noncompliance with federal grant conditions as well as sanctions. And also that federal grant conditions do permit CPA to pay for OPA services from airport revenues as long as it's connected to airport operations and as long as there's this approved cost allocation plan. So and then we go on to acknowledge OPA's position that this should be a reasonable and allowable cost, and that there is no final determination from federal grantors that the 1% fee is in fact unlawful revenue diversion. OPA also noted that in all of CPA's past audit reports, the 1% public auditor fee has never been cited as a question cost. And that was something that the FAA officials and CPA also acknowledged. So, a key provision of this substitute bill is to provide for a sunset provision of 3 years. So this should be a temporary exemption. 3 years, we think, should be enough time for OPA, for all the agencies to resolve the dispute and really come to a determination of whether or not this 1% fee is in fact revenue diversion. So if we could get to the operating language of the substitute bill. I could read it while we wait for the internet connection to work.
While we're waiting, may I? While we're waiting, in line with what Rep. Tina said, as a result of their meeting with FAA, OPA, DOF, was the Senate president there? Somebody from the Senate.
Yes, he was there.
Okay.
Both the speaker and the Senate president.
Okay, good to know. I was just thinking if FAA is or may consider this as revenue diversion, the 1%, and there, as we heard Chairwoman Kim Hines say, it's the end of the fiscal year when it transfers over to the general fund. That's what the FAA was concerned about, that it may be considered revenue diversion. I was wondering if OPA could come up with a spending plan for this 1% for the autonomous agencies. Maybe we can get away with it, or, if CPA can get away with it, as long as every penny is accounted for. I think that'll be something to consider for this committee.
Right. So I did ask about the part of the Constitution really that requires unencumbered fund balances to go to the general fund. The reality is that there have never been unencumbered fund balances. OPA has always been underfunded, and there's really never been any transfer of funds to the general fund. So there's that issue, which is really just more of a practical issue. But second, FAA and CPA have said that if there was this reasonable and approved cost allocation plan that would break down how how the OPA fees would be spent. And as long as it's related to airport operations, it's connected to the airport, it can't be used for any other, functions, I guess. This is what we heard yesterday. And as long as it's documented, then yes, CPA can pay these OPA fees. But and this bill, the proposed bill, would allow OPA to charge reasonable rates for services rendered to CPA, including services related to airport operations and funding. So this is an attempt at middle ground. So there would be an exemption, but if there are services that are rendered to CPA, OPA can charge fees for that, and CPA shall pay them. So this is the operating language. We would amend Title I, Section 7831 of the Commonwealth Code to add a new subsection to read as follows. The Commonwealth Ports Authority shall be exempt from the withholding and payment requirements of subsections A and B as to CPA's airport revenues only. This exemption does not apply to CPA's seaport revenues or any other non-airport related funding sources of CPA, provided that the Office of the Public Auditor may charge the Commonwealth Ports Authority a reasonable rate for any services rendered to CPA, including services related in whole or in part to CPA's airport operations and funding. And CPA shall pay OPA for these services no later than the end of the fiscal year following the year in which such service was requested or performed. And that last part is language that we took from the bill that CPA helped draft. So, and then the next part, Section 3, is the sunset clause. This act shall automatically expire 3 years from its effective date. This is, again, to give the agencies time to work out this conflict and get some clarification and a final determination from the grantors, the federal grantors, and also give time for the next legislature to revisit whether this exemption should be continued or not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, and I'm open to any questions, and perhaps Rep. Camacho would like to add to that.
I recognize Rep. Babalta.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Rep. Tina and Rep. Camacho for attending the meeting and providing us feedback. OPA did raise concerns that having to charge autonomous agencies does not bode well with them because it hampers their independence and their, they did mention that in the other day they were here. So I'm wondering if and you mentioned that CPA helped draft this particular language of the bill that we're trying to now incorporate. But I was wondering, what did OPA have to say to that language? And also, it's not clear to me at this point whether we did exclude the other autonomous agencies as was in the original bill. Okay, that's what I wanted to get to. So this is only particular to CPA. I'm just afraid that the other autonomous agencies will cry foul. So we need to consider that. And as to I'll yield for now, just so we can get further clarity from Rep. Sablon or Rep. Camacho on record that this, only applies to CPA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Babalta. I recognize Rep. Sablon.
Yeah, thank you, Rep. Babalta, for raising those questions. So yes, to clarify, this bill would only apply to the Commonwealth Ports Authority, and the exemption would only apply for airport revenues. We did try to carefully tailor it to accommodate the specific concerns that we were hearing from CPA and FAA about how this may be revenue diversion with respect to the 1% fee. But we also tried to accommodate OPA and the Department of Finance's concerns that this could set a really bad precedent and further undermine OPA's independence and integrity. And you're right that OPA did express concerns about being compelled to come up with a rate schedule for services. I think they described this as potentially creating perverse incentives for the agency to go after the autonomous agencies, wherever there might be money, to charge for things like investigations that really does put them at risk, at least in terms of their political independence. But I guess in the spirit of compromise, to try to balance the interests of all the parties and all the different concerns that have been expressed, this is where we've landed. And when I spoke with the public auditor yesterday, and I was chatting with her a bit today, they are accountants. They could come up with some kind of cost allocation plan, or at least try to. But I think even ahead of that, ahead of coming up with rates to charge CPA, they really do want to pursue further clarification with the federal grantors to come to this determination that we don't have yet about whether the 1% fee is in fact revenue diversion. So I think that would really be the first step, and then the operating language of this bill would at least give them the authority to come up with a rate schedule if that is where we end up landing ultimately. Thank you.
The concern that I have is, so if we include in the language that OPA shall charge for services rendered, who's to say they may perform all these audits and there's no ceiling to this, whereas with the 1%, they're only limited to how much that 1% is of the total revenue. But if there's no 1% of something, then CPA may undergo all these audits that OPA may charge in excess of what would have been 1%, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I will also note that the way the language is written now for autonomous agencies, it's at least 1%, or like whatever is the greater of 1%, or any other formula that the agencies can agree to, right? So if you want to put in this temporary exemption, I guess a ceiling of 1%, we can consider that.
All right, thank you for clarifying. Maybe when the substitute gets proposed, then we'll find a language. But before we entertain any substitute, Richard, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Just one question. When they came in here, they also mentioned, is it really necessary to remove, like you said, it would take precedence. Is it really necessary to remove that opiate 1% fee to have them get whatever they wish, grants? And that was the question. I mean, was any one of you mentioned that to the federal agencies or wherever came in? Hey, if this was removed or this wasn't removed, is the grant will stop? That's the question that I want to know, because that was one of the questions.
And actually, that was one of the questions that was posed to the FAA officials at one point during the meeting, was like, what is the consequence if this legislation doesn't pass, right? And and the answer was really not that clear. They said it was a lot of the same kind of language that we've heard and that we've seen in the letters back and forth between the agencies, is that CPA may be found in noncompliance. It just depends on how the OPA fees are being applied. There should be a cost allocation plan, right? And it really wasn't definitive, which I think at least it wasn't enough to satisfy me that for sure CPA grants are going to be canceled, or that they're going to be placed in noncompliance for sure, and that airport operations will stop. There was nothing like that was communicated at the meeting yesterday. It was more like a concern about possible jeopardizing of an impossible noncompliance. But that was a lot of the discussion yesterday. Yeah, at least not from the two officials that came today. They just again expressed concerns that there may be revenue diversion happening, and that could be a problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other member? I recognize Rep Camacho.
I just want to ask, maybe I remember when CPA came in yesterday, or was that yesterday, with the OPA. Wasn't one of the ideas to apply the 1% to the seaport and not to the airport? Is that still on the table, or?
Yes, and that is in the operating language. So, Council, if you could go to that part. So, the Commonwealth Ports Authority shall be exempt from the withholding and payment requirements as to CPA's airport revenues only. And this exemption does not apply to seaport revenues or any other non-airport related funding sources of CPA. And then the findings also further clarify that seaport revenues shall still be subject to the 1% public auditor's fee.
Okay, just want to make
Yeah,
sure.
but thank you for asking that. That was an important, I think, concession that CPA did make. They are willing to pay the 1% fee for seaport revenues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rep Camacho. Any other member? I recognize Rep Babalta.
I think just to share my thoughts, I think if OPA were really determined to get the 1% from CPA, they could easily come up with a cost allocation plan, and that way, they don't get short funded from CPA revenues. I think it would be prudent to ask them to do so rather than amend the proposed bill. I do see that this is the middle ground based on all sides that we have heard, and Rep Sablon and Rep Camacho have attended the detailed meeting, and they have more information. And I see that this is middle ground, but I keep going back to OPA, how they were saying that they were underfunded. I mean, part of the reason why they're not fully funded to begin with is because a lot of these agencies haven't really paid into their fees. So I think it would be prudent for OPA to come up with a specific spend cost allocation plan for CPA, just so that they don't lose out on any funds they may be entitled to under the original statute. And I see the chairman's point too, how there's no ceiling to it, I mean, it'd be easy for them to come up with a cost spending plan. They don't, CPA and FAA is not requiring that they be detailed except to identify the costs associated with it. Once those plans are executed by OPA on CPA. So I'm just thinking about that. And I mean, if like I said, OPA were really determined to get their money's worth from, or following the letter of the statute, I think they should and could possibly come up with a cost allocation spending plan. That's all I have. Just registering my thoughts on it. And are we going to vote on this bill today, Mr. Chairman?
That was the goal. Today is the deadline that the speaker gave to act. I can request for an extension, but we have a session on Monday. I think that we're trying to get this in by Monday's session. If members still have questions, we can still recess for this afternoon after Department of Finance. But keep in mind that Ms. Claire will need the time to prepare the committee report in order to get it out by tomorrow afternoon. But we do have, we are expecting a substitute to be introduced today. And so if that's something that members will need time to look over and I guess formulate their questions by the end of the day, they can raise these questions at a later time if we do decide to recess until this afternoon. Yes, Rep. Babalta.
Thank you. One important question. Did we, in this substitute, did we propose or did Rep. Tina propose that the previous arrears be written off?
No.
So that
no,
stays on the books?
Yes.
And how, I'm sorry, did you mention that to FAA and what is their feedback on that? Did they know about it?
If I may,
Yes.
Chairman. So the past dues to OPA actually did not come up during the discussion yesterday, partly because according to Ms. Hines and according to the Secretary of Finance, they're already working out these offset agreements, and that the issue now is not the money, as Ms. Hines said, but what's in the law and whether the 1% fee is revenue diversion, right? So we really just focused on that. And in any event, OPA's position is, that any arrears that the autonomous agencies, including CPA, may owe, it's not to OPA. They don't really have a dog in that fight anymore. It's really owed to the general fund, and that's between finance and the agencies to work out. And that is happening now with CPA.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a great idea to call a short recess for this afternoon and possibly just so we do our due diligence, right, to provide the proposed amendments to OPA so that they can come back with a response and then we can go from there. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Is this the substitute, by the way?
Not yet. Well, it will be if she introduces it,
Oh.
but she's providing members a glance. 1 second. Rep. Vicente Camacho.
Yeah, thank you. Yesterday during that, you know, hearing was what I heard Kimberly Hines mention is, and I didn't get to the question, but what she had mentioned was all the revenues that were generated out there was for airport use only, correct? Now I wanted to get to where, how much money are they getting from grants? Since they're very concerned about the grants. It was never mentioned. So if revenues is the only source that maintains the airport, so what did they use with the grants monies? And how much? That was the question I wanted to ask, since, where does revenue diversion comes in when we are using 1% from just the revenue that they generate? Thank you.
The revenue would come from the fees that they collect from vendors and yeah. I recognize Rep. Joel Camacho.
Oh yeah. Maybe a question to the proposer of the substitute. What is the purpose of the sunset provision? Just wondering.
Yes, so that's mentioned in the findings. It would be to allow the agencies time to obtain final determination and clarification from the federal grantors as to whether this 1% fee is in fact revenue diversion. And from my communications with OPA, they do intend to elevate this inquiry. So to go above the regional official that was here yesterday and really get some clarification from FAA about this issue. So, the 3-year sunset would give them the time to do that. And then actually also, in 3 years, the next legislature can decide whether to continue the exemption, whether to make it permanent or whether to just let it lapse.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep Camacho. I recognize Rep Babalta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think in response to Rep. Vicente Camacho's concerns or comments, I did hear Chairwoman Kim Hines say that the 1% that OPA seeks or is a part of the statute is roughly 300,000 for airport service or airport revenues and about 30 to 40K grant for the seaport activities. So based on that figures, which is 1%, their airport revenue would be approximately 3 million.
Correction, sorry, 1.4. It was 1.4 for airport.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 140,000 for airport.
Oh, so that would be about 1
One-
million,
1.4.
1.4 based on those numbers. And then 30 to 40,000 is 1% of it, roughly 300 to 400,000 on seaport. So I hope that makes it clear to Rep. Ben how much the revenue is that they approximate to be 1% of their revenue. Is that correct? Is my So that'd be 1.4
No,
million.
14 million in revenues.
14.
Whoa.
And then 1% is 140.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, if I may.
Recognize.
And in the executive director for CPA's letter to the chairman, he also indicated that CPA receives over $5 million in airport improvement projects, and this is for infrastructure, the new jet bridges, also the fire trucks, improvements to the runway, and then on top of that, there's the fees and the rents that they charge to other government agencies and other users of the airports. So altogether, though, the 1% annually from airport revenues is estimated to be 140,000 to OPA that they would pay.
Which is minimal.
I recognize the Vice Chair.
And this is not so much a response to Rep. Vicente Camacho, but more of a comment. So I was watching the meeting last night on YouTube, and I heard that the grants that the airport is receiving are used for capital improvements. So nothing on operations, just making improvements on their landing field and stuff like that. And then they're hoping that with those improvements, that would generate more revenues for their operations use.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, maybe I'll give this time to anyone who would like to introduce any amendments or substitute, and then we'll have a short discussion before we decide on whether we will continue with the if we'll go back on recess or if members are in agreement with any proposed amendments or substitute. So at this time, we are still under the new business, which is House Bill 22-102. Further discussion?
Can we take a recess so we can all read
Before
The proposed
introduction or?
substitute. Yes, please.
Okay. Well, we do have MVA in about 5 minutes. So
Are those the
thinking to
only
come back
amendments that
after
you're
MVA
proposing?
or after?
I'm in
finance?
favor of it if we're time.
No, but
time
better
constraint.
if we introduce the substitute now, so
Okay.
any other, um,
Did you get any feedback from OPA regarding the?
yeah, so we'll allow Rep. Sablon to introduce the substitute, and then any amendments to that substitute can be made when we get back from recess this afternoon, if members are okay. So at this time, I recognize Rep. Sablon.
Thank you. I would like to offer House Bill 22102, House Substitute 1. Actually, I think our legislative assistant said this should be marked as a House substitute. Okay. Yeah, so I'm sorry. That should be corrected as a typo. So House Bill 22102, House Substitute 1, as it's on the screen, and then I will circulate hard copies to the members. So move.
A motion was made on House Bill 22-102 as a substitute, or to introduce it as a substitute, a House Substitute 1. And has been seconded. Or discussion on the motion? All in favor of adopting House Bill 22-102 HS1, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. So we now have HB 22-102 HS1. We will act on the main motion on the passage or the adoption of HS1 when we get back from recess. Members, we do have MVA and Department of Finance today, and so when you have the time to review the substitute during the break between MVA and Finance, please prepare any amendments you may have, and then we can entertain those amendments, should there be any, this afternoon after we adjourn from the budget hearing.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize.
So we're going to recess at this point
Yes.
until what time?
Finance is at 1, so I would set aside 2 hours for finance. So we'll recess till 3.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Before we recess, we'll give MVA about 10 minutes to set up and members to take a break before we start the budget hearing. And so with that, please come back by 10:10. And so short recess.